Alrighty, good evening, everyone. It is Wednesday, March 20th at 7 p.m. We will call to order the regular meeting of the Meridian Library District Board of Trustees. We will begin with item 1 on our meeting agenda, public comment. We have momentarily. Thank you very much. All right, I will remind our members of the public that we welcome public comment. We are limited to 3 minutes. The expectation is that public comment will be civil, and the board is very attuned to the open meeting law requirements. We will not engage in dialogue on items that are not on our agenda. And with that, Mr. Carter.
Thank you. When does the timer begin?
Now.
I am here to discuss the Meridian Library District Code of Conduct Policy. I have a printout from 2022 that was out here at the Ask Desk. They were so kind as to print a new copy. Even with the letterhead, it's actually shorter of the recent one. So congrats on maybe good font management there. There is a space between, in the first paragraph, between the word the and branches. So you might want to get that fixed. I appreciate very much the years that you guys have spent on looking at this policy. The specific policy I want to bring to focus is that of item number 11, reading as follows. The possession of a firearm or deadly weapon, as defined by Idaho Code, on MLD property is prohibited unless expressly permitted by law. There have been several times in my attendance here at the library over the years where someone who sees me actively open carry will report me as being scared because the policy requires some sort of interpretation or understanding or definition of what Idaho Code brings. I am actually requesting and placing before the board to remove this policy, as state code is very clear in Idaho Code 18-3302, section J, that indeed there is no permissibility of any political subdivision to have policy, procedure, or regulations which govern the carry of firearms. The reason why this specific code, as I've noted, this policy, I believe, is not in concert with either our Idaho Constitution, Article 1, Section 11, the right to bear arms, or state code, is that it gives an impression, because the other words that are used here is scare or other items like that present ways you're presenting a danger to the public, and they look at this, the policy necessarily is requiring a person to go and try to find the Idaho Code that defines what firearm or deadly weapon is. And in their fear that they think that they might have, when there really should not be that fear, because we have open carry that's quite well and good throughout this state, that they would otherwise report a false negative requiring a direction by the MLD staff as to either exit the premises, because they have to discern that, when in fact that would also be a conflict with one of the other policies, which says a person not obeying a reasonable direction by MLD staff. Thank you for listening. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. That brings us to item number 2 on our agenda, the consent agenda. Consent agenda items are routine and considered without discussion. We have before us, or in our packets, meeting minutes from February 21st and 3 policies with just very minor changes and updates to them. The public records policy, the privacy and confidentiality policy, and the displays and exhibits policy. I'd entertain a motion.
Madam Chair.
Josh?
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the consent agenda as published.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I second.
Thank you, Laura. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to item number 3 on our agenda, financial reports. Item A is the approval of the January financial reports. Item B is disbursement approvals. Thank you, Emma, for 72 pages of financial reports in our packets. We always appreciate and enjoy that. Any comments to add there, Nick or Emma?
I don't have anything.
Thank you. Questions, comments from the trustees?
Madam Chair, just one comment.
Go ahead, Josh.
Emma, I really appreciate the breakdown and the heads up on the breakdown moving forward with the different budgets within administration, personnel, and operations. That I think that's a very useful tool for a quick look for us. So thank you. Good work.
Other questions? Anything from Jeff? I assume you can hear and, okay. All right, hearing no questions, I would entertain a motion to approve the January financial reports and disbursements.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead, Laura.
I move that we approve the January financial reports and disbursements.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Destiny. Further comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to item number 4. I'm very excited. The FY 2023 audit presentation and acceptance.
Madam Chair.
Go
The,
ahead, Nick.
The firm that has done our audit is not able to be here tonight, so we will need to make a motion to table this item until next month.
Thank you, Nick. Bummer. But I do know that the audit has been wrapped up, so it sounds like just a scheduling conflict around presentation to the board itself. So I would move to table item number 4 on our agenda until the April meeting.
Second.
Thank you, Josh. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to item number 5. I'm also excited. Certificate of participation financing.
Madam Chair, while Jason's getting that set up, I just point of order for the members of the public. If anyone came specifically to hear about the audit results, rest assured, they were all good.
Adam, it's good to see you. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Good evening. My name is Adam Christensen. As a reminder, I am your bond counsel with regard to the South Branch project. Basically, what that means is that I am charged with drafting legal docs, making sure everything is done correctly, drafting your disclosure to the municipal marketplace, and ultimately issuing the opinions that you'll need to finance the project. I want to give just a very kind of high level overview of where we've been, kind of where we are now and where we're going. It won't take long, and I won't go into the long history of this project. The district did initiate this project, and I've been working on it since 2021. It probably had its foundations before that. We were at a point where we were very close to financing this in early 2022. That did not happen for various reasons. The financing team, which was put together at that time, is still together and is in fact back together effectively. And myself and Eric, who will speak in a minute, are part of that team, as well as some others that will be on a slide that Eric has. And that's the team that is working towards getting that financing completed and getting that project in district hands. The district team, after things sort of fell apart in 2022, the district team worked with Brighton to reimagine that project and find a structure that worked for both parties. This board ultimately approved a purchase and sale agreement last October in 2023 for the purchase of the building that is now being constructed on the site in South Meridian. As a reminder, the mechanism for financing here is what we call a certificate of participation. It's essentially a lease purchase financing mechanism with a lease-leaseback structure, and then annual payments subject to appropriation each year by the district to repay that money. The timeline, which again Eric will go through in a minute in more detail, is 5 years. It is structured, or will be structured, to sync up with your plant levy that you have, which runs through 2029. So the ultimate source of those payments is intended to be those plant levy payments that come in each year through 2029. We are now in the process of updating those documents that were originally put together several years ago. That includes the leases, the trust indenture, and that offering document that I mentioned before, which we call the preliminary official statement. That is essentially your prospectus to the municipal market that tells all about you, your finances, the project itself, and gives investors an idea of what they would be investing in. That is all happening now. That will continue to happen over the next several months with various versions going back and forth with the financing team, and ultimately coming to you all in a substantially final form anticipated at the July board meeting. You would then at that time have the ability to approve those documents should you desire to do that, and instruct us to move forward with the sale of the certificates. That process from sale to close takes several weeks. We would anticipate that occurs in August, and Eric has a more detailed timeline here in this slide deck that you'll see in a minute. And then we would close, we assume, sometime in August. From a timing standpoint, closing of the purchase of the facility from Brighton and closing of the financing will occur simultaneously or effectively simultaneously on the same day. That's essentially because you need the proceeds from the financing to purchase the facility. So those will close simultaneously. At that time, you will own the land, you will own the building. It will all be district library branch, and then you will make payments over the ensuing 5 years to pay that off. So that is sort of the very high level general overview. And then I'll let Eric come up and kind of run through the structure, the numbers, and what we're looking at this point from a marketing and financing perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then we can bring Adam back if you've got some legal questions.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks for being here.
I won't try to answer them. So Eric Herringer with Piper Sandler. I think Adam covered most of my slide one, but if we can go to slide one, sometimes it's good to hear things twice. So, we kind of lay out what are the financing goals. Financing goals have always been to, provide an annual appropriation lease purchase financing for the South Library branch, and using the 1.4 million of your annual plant levy to make those payments as a lease on a lease purchase basis. So now we know the construction is going to be completed somewhere projected for August of 2024. We want to sync up the timing of the financing with the completion of that project when you get your certificate of occupancy. And so we'll be working towards an August pricing and closing date, and then we'll be in touch, making sure that we're not delayed. And if we are, we can push things out, but we're going to really target August and zero in on a appropriate pricing date in August when everything is coming together. We know that the purchase price is $6,610,000. And we also, again, know that we want to, pay for that with annual appropriation of the 1.4 million from your plant levy. But basically we have 5 years because that plant levy runs out in 2029. So when we finance in August, we'll plan on using the 2025, 2026, 2027, 2028, 2029, 5 years of plant levies. So 5 times 1.4, that's $7 million. There's not a lot of room to pay interest on these the lease purchase. So what we're going to look at a project budget that basically requires what we call an equity contribution. So money at the front end that it can't be financed because we're not going to have payments that are higher than that 1.4 million. Does that all makes sense? It makes sense. It's how when we have to structure the financing, that's kind of what we're solving for. If I go to the next slide, I think, generally there's some good news and bad news when it comes to interest rates. Interest rates are higher than they were in 2020 and 2021 when this project was being, envisioned. But they are actually lower than they were in 2022 when we kind of held off on pulling the trigger on the financing. So you can see there kind of those two peaks on the right-hand side of that chart. We're now in a lower interest rate environment, particularly for tax-exempt municipal bonds. And this is kind of one of the things that when a municipal entity like the library district borrow money on a tax-exempt basis. And what that means is the investors who buy the bonds or who provide the financing, that interest income they get, they don't pay income tax on. They don't pay federal income tax. They don't pay state income tax. And therefore, they're willing to take a lower interest cost than if they bought a bond that they had to pay interest or income tax on, like a treasury bond. So treasury bonds are actually still pretty high in terms of rate, but tax exempt bonds have moved much lower relative to treasury. So that's all good news. If you pay attention to the financial markets, you're like, well, wait, rates are still high. Mortgage rates are still really high. But these tax exempt interest rates, like that you can access, have moved in context a lot lower than those other rates. So that's good. That is good news. This is another way to look at interest rates. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Just kind of gives you a range of where interest rates have been over the last 10 years, depending on how long you borrow. So if I borrow for 1 year, that's that first bar. It shows the kind of range of interest rates over a 10-year period from almost 0 up to 3.75. And the blue line is where we're at currently. And the red line is the average over that period of time. So this is important to know because interest rates move around a lot and we're not going to finance until August. And so interest rates could go up and they could also go down. We always are hoping they're going down because that's going to reduce your cost of capital for the project. The next slide gives you an idea what the financing would look like if we did it basically today. So scenario 1, based on current interest rates, this is as of March 12th. And again, we're sizing the amount of the financing to be so you can pay for it with the 1.4 million. And if I read top to bottom, we'd end up selling, the financing would be just over 6 million. It would generate some what we call premium. You basically end up with about 6.6 million of total proceeds. Or I'm sorry, not 6.6. You end up with about 6.4. You pay some costs, but to make up the difference between how much you're bringing in and what you have to pay the 6,610,000 in the purchase price is that 294,908. You see that equity contribution line item. So almost $300,000. So you can pull that out of the plant fund. Those plant levy dollars that have been coming in over the past few years have been going into a plant fund. And so you do have the equity set aside for the project. If you go where it's covered up by the picture there. So what happens if interest rates go up? And that's the scenario 2. So if interest rates are 0.5% higher when we finance, it just means more of an equity contribution. And so how much? It's about an extra $100,000. So instead of 294, it's 386,000. So not quite 100,000 more that you have to come out of pocket. So that's not, you don't like having to come up with another 100,000, but it's not insurmountable. And if interest rates went up a full percent, not a 50 basis points is a 0.5%. That's what that 50 BPS. So if it went up a full percent, you're looking at a couple $100,000. Oh, and we don't necessarily think that's going to happen. What else to say about this? The all-in borrowing cost on the key statistics section, the all-in borrowing cost for scenario 1, roughly 3.5%. So that's what you're looking at in terms of borrowing cost. 1.4 million is your annual debt service, and so you have total payments that add up to just under 7 million, like we talked about at the beginning. Any questions there? One of the things we did when we kind of re-engaged on this project was we looked at, well, what if we just went to a bank and just made things a lot simpler, so we didn't have to do as much, there wouldn't be as much work around the disclosure documents. We wouldn't have to pay for underwriting. We wouldn't have to go get a bond rating. There's a lot of upfront fees we could avoid if we just went to a bank and got the financing. And that's a consideration because it's a relatively short financing, and we think it's a very good credit quality. So we surveyed a few banks and got some responses back, and basically bank financing all in would be about a full percent higher than what you're able to get in the bond market. The plan all along was to go to the bond market. We went through an RFP process 3 years ago, hired a company called Stifel to be the underwriter and go to the market. They would have understood if we decided to switch and go to a bank. But I reviewed that with Nick and Emma and the team, and why would we avoid saving $100,000 when we can? And so we're going to go with the bond market route because it makes more financial sense. Okay. And then the last page kind of just goes through the timeline. So, we didn't want to get anything going until we talked to you and said, okay, is this what you want to do? Give us the green light. We'll re-engage the rest of the finance team. Adam and Emma have been and Nick have been working on, the data we need to update for this offering document called the preliminary official statement. So that work's underway. But what we also want to let everyone else know, the underwriter, their counsel, get on the rating agency schedule. And, we'll kick that into gear, assuming you tell us to go forward after tonight's meeting, we'll get all that underway. We'll basically spend April getting the financing documents that Adam is preparing, the lease purchase agreement and the trust indenture, the disclosure document, the preliminary official statement, getting those documents in draft form. Then we'll spend May and June reviewing them, making sure they're perfect. Then we'll talk to the rating agency, Moody's, in June, get a bond rating on the financing. That's like a credit rating. We expect it to be a very strong credit rating. That's why we're asking for it. And the higher the rating, the lower your borrowing cost, just like a personal credit rating. The action item, I'd say next action item, it's really the action item, is in July. We plan to be at your board meeting in July to have a resolution that would authorize, basically approve all these documents, approve the financing, delegate authority to probably Nick and the chair or Emma to finalize the interest rates on the financing, so that we have the flexibility to go into the market and get things done as long as we meet parameters that, like, for example, not to exceed 1.4 million in annual payments, and generate the proceeds that you need. So July would be the official action. Following that, we'd post the preliminary official statement. That's your offering document, the marketing document we use to market the bonds to investors. We get that on the market. The underwriter, Stifel, is pre-selling the bonds. And then on a date specific, we've right now have August 6th on our schedule, is when they go out and take orders for those bonds, set interest rates, and that would be the date you'd lock in your borrowing cost, lock in all the final financing terms. You take about 2 weeks between then and the closing, and the closing is the date you get the money. Everything's signed, closed, money is delivered. You deliver that to Brighton, they give you the keys, and you move in. And then going forward, you just make the payments as planned, and in 2029, your financing's paid off and everything's owned free and clear. So that's what it's going to take. And thankfully, a lot of the work has already been kind of done. The shell's been set up. It just needs to be updated. One more slide just to go over the team. You are the issuer, Meridian Library District, so you're in charge. You guys tell us to go or not go, and put things in motion. And you've made decisions to bring on the team. You have Holly Troxel doing your legal work. Piper Sandler, we're your municipal advisor. What that means is we have a fiduciary responsibility to you and guide you through this process, and make recommendations that are in the district's best interest, and kind of represent you when we talk to the underwriter, which is Stifel. Stifel is going to be a broker. They're actually going out and talking to investors and securing the investors and assigning, basically setting the final interest rates. And so we're making sure they're doing their job properly. We're guiding you through the rating agency process, things like that. So Stifel, as I mentioned, they're the underwriter. We're going to have them engaged here shortly to start reviewing documents and working side by side with us. They have their counsel, just to make sure that what they're doing is meeting all the MSRB regulations, and that's Underwriters Council's Ballard Spar. We've worked with them a lot, so they're a known quantity. And then Zions Bank is the trustee paying agent, so they're going to be the ones that keep track of what the payments that you need to make, and then making sure those payments get to the investors on the bonds, and they're going to hold all the various funds related to the financing. And then the rating agency is Moody's. They're kind of a household name in the municipal bond world. That we work with them all the time in rating these types of transactions. So we have a pretty good idea where they're going to rate the library district in this financing for a COP. So I think that's it. Questions or additional comments?
Yeah, just a couple comments.
I'm sorry, Adam, for benefit of online, if you could talk it in the mic. Thank you.
So the 6,610,000 price that's in the slides, just want to reiterate that that is a sort of a guaranteed maximum price. As the eternal optimist, I think we are hoping that it comes in lower. To the extent it comes in lower, and as a reminder, Brighton is doing this at their cost. So to the extent their cost comes in lower than that amount, that is essentially less equity that you would have to put into the deal. So we're for planning purposes, we're assuming that's the number, but I think we can all hope that maybe it's a little less than that. And then the only other thing was we say bonds a lot. It's an occupational hazard. These aren't bonds. So just as a clarification, these are certificates. They're a lease-based financing tool. They haven't. They're not bonds in the sense that most people think of bonds. So it's still the bond market or the municipal market, but just wanted to clarify that. So with that, are there any questions for either Eric or I?
Thank you. I have a couple, but I'll cede the floor. Fellow trustees, go ahead.
Madam Chair, I'm not sure who this falls under, but my first question about the rating from Moody, is that projected to potentially change based on legislative action that may or may not happen between now and June? Or is it they've already looked and pre-underwritten us or pre-rated us and won't be going back again based on state?
Yeah, we won't actually
Law
get the
or
rating until I think I had June on the time frame. So no, it'll all be based on the information in June. Well, the information we're preparing between now and then that we'll deliver to them. I would say that there's kind of the major picture, big picture rating categories is the size and diversity of the tax base, and that's a very strong credit factor for the library district. You have a very large and diverse tax base that's generating that 1.4 million in plant levy, so that's good. What's the economy here in the Treasure Valley is very good. That's going to be positive. Your financials, I haven't looked at your latest audit, but I trust that they're in very good shape, and that's going to also drive. And then there's the final thing is the governance piece of it, and that's kind of hard to quantify. I mean, I think when you think about governance, there's the governance that you control, and then there's the governance that gets pushed down on you from the legislature. And so that'll just have to be evaluated at the time. The question will be, will it impact your ability to pay on the certificates? So.
Well, the idea being that if we are potentially subject to large verdicts or private action in lawsuit form
Yeah.
as an entity, if that would correlate to it's a AAA to double A or single A or something like that, or
Yeah, it'll just be a matter of evaluating how much exposure there is and can it be papered over with insurance and what that all looks like.
and this evaluation be done by out-of-state entities.
Yeah, the rating analysts are they're based all over the country. But typically, we'll get a rating analyst that's going to be assigned to Idaho that's going to either be in San Francisco or Denver.
And this is, correct me if I'm wrong, the first time the MLD has ever pursued this sort of
Bond rating, I believe
financial
so.
instrument.
Yeah. This financial instrument.
I can answer that.
Go ahead.
This is the first time that we've used it. However, with the plant facility levy that we have coming in, it has very restricted use on it, and so that is guaranteed for the life of the plant facility levy, which will expire in 2029, and it can only go to extremely limited things. So from an exposure standpoint, it's not tied to our general fund in any way, and so it can't be reallocated for other purposes other than for the construction and allocation of new facilities and things of that nature. So it does have pretty tight parameters around how we can use those funds.
Sort of like an impact fee fund, essentially.
Restricted
use.
Yeah.
And in a lockbox, it cannot be subject to distribution otherwise. Okay, and the stifle offering, do they generally market that to institutional investors or accredited investors? And is there any possibility that locals that maybe want to have some stake and say, hey, I helped fund
Yep.
this purchase?
Yeah, great question. We get they will market the certificates. Thank you, Adam. To institutional investors typically because they buy in larger blocks, and it's but there's also absolutely the ability to make them available for retail purchase. We call it retail purchase, local purchase. Stiefel has offices in Idaho. I don't know if they have. I'm pretty sure they have a local office in Meridian. And so the certificates are sold in $5,000 increments. I have to imagine that they will be approved for retail because if you get a bond rating in the AA or even single A category, that's a product you can sell to retail, which is mom and pops or local citizens. Yep. So if that's an important thing, we can make sure that Stiefel has a plan to address that.
Well, my last comment is I sure wish I had access to this kind of capital at these kind of rates because we're looking at a 5-year repayment term. That's a car loan for most people. And the fact that we're saving substantially on commercial rates and other instruments, I think it's pretty good financial stewardship, taxpayer dollars. That's all I have.
Thank you, Josh. Okay. So Eric, the rate that you have presented as, kind of the hypothetical, sorry about that. That factors in the bond rating already. We wouldn't expect if we got a AA rating that we might have a better one or
that factors in the rating that we're expecting.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I believe we're expecting AA3.
Okay. And then to Adam's comment, the trustees may remember when we negotiated the contract with Brighton, when we negotiated the agreement, of course, Brighton was protecting itself in the event things went wrong, that they wouldn't end up eating some of the costs. So they have those factors in there, but they did agree to pass it along at cost. So we'll hope for the best. So toward that end on the schedule, so if something were to happen and every day that goes by we get closer to feeling confident in that August completion date, but say we have a really unusual weather event or something and we're delayed 2 weeks, that resolution and official statement that goes out in July, is that still usable even if we end up in September with the financing? Is there an end date on that?
I'll let you go.
There's not an end date. We could, the sort of the hypothetical bad scenario, right, is the one we're dealing with now, which is we drafted it and it was all accurate in 2022. And now we're in 2024 and we have to update it, right? Because your financials have changed. You've had multiple years of events. The project is different. But no, the simple answer to your question is no. If it gets pushed 2 weeks or a month, none of that is basically going to change. We're going to have your financials, I guess, in April, and we will incorporate those into the document. Those aren't going to change until next March, right? When you get your new audit next year. So no, I think from a timing perspective, we'll be, touching base and making sure that what we don't want to do is go to the market and sell certificates and then have a delay, because there is sort of an expected closing time frame that investors expect from when they buy the certificates to when they actually close. But we would know that by the time we went to the market. So we're trying to time it as best we can to be as close in time as when Brighton says they're done. I think as a practical matter, there's probably going to be a couple week lag just to make sure that we in fact have the certificate of occupancy and that we can actually are ready to close on the real property before we make sure that we're closing on the financing, because we don't want to get those two flipped. But no, it's not a big deal if it pushes out a couple weeks or into September. It's not a problem from a financing perspective.
Thank you.
Yep.
My next question is actually for Emma and Nick. So thinking about our final 5 years of the plant facility levy dedicated to the South Branch project. So that would mean that I think what we have on hand as the end of 2024, after we pay for the South Branch FF&E and so forth, is what we have for the Cherry Lane remodel. Is that fair to say?
Yes, plus some interest rate earning projections. and some potential future contributions to capital repair and replacement from future fiscal year general fund.
Thank you. Plus anything from foundation activity, I guess. Yeah. Go ahead, Nick.
I would add that because we will be financing the overall bulk of the Pinnacle branch, that does expedite the potential timeline for the Cherry Lane remodel, because we won't have to wait for the accumulation of funds that would have been required had another option presented itself. But in the same vein as the plant facility levies have restricted use, the repair and replacement fund also has very defined use as well. And so having a little bit of the plant facility funds and then the bulk of it, of the other funds being in the repair and replacement, that means that we will more likely than not be able to move forward at a much more expedited rate to get started on the Cherry Lane remodel. So then what I had been looking at for the last year or so.
Excellent. Thank you. And I appreciate that comment about the repair and reserve. I do understand that, right? That those funds are can't be used on anything new, basically in a high level way. So when we budget for that project and plan that project, we'll have to be very careful about what goes in what bucket as far as that goes. Other questions, comments?
And
So-
Chair,
Go ahead, Nick.
Adam, could you maybe circle back to something that you said at the top of the presentation with the lease and lease back, and just kind of give a summary of what that means so that there's some clarity there?
Yeah, sure. I didn't go into it on purpose because I didn't want to get everyone confused, but I'll try and do it as simply as I can. So the way this works is you will purchase the property from Brighton using the proceeds of the certificates. You will then be the owner, what we call the fee owner of the property. Much like you are with your house, even if you have a mortgage on it, you are the owner, right? You then will turn around and execute a primary lease, which is a 5-year lease to the bond trustee, which on the slide is Zion's. Zion's then turns around and leases it back to you on a year-to-year basis. And under that year-to-year lease, which we call an appropriation lease, you make a lease payment each year that you appropriate, which essentially is the debt service on the certificates. So each year you, in your budget, you appropriate a line item to make that lease payment for the following year. You make the lease payment, you get another year down the line. In 2029, you've made your last payment, the leases terminate, the trust indenture goes away, and the financing's done. So it's the lease back is essentially a long-term lease to Zion's, and then the lease back of that property on a year-to-year basis. And that's structured for constitutional reasons and the inability to incur indebtedness longer than 1 year. Yes. So if you don't make a lease payment, you, much like anyone who doesn't make their lease payment, right, you're asked to get out. You are still the owner of the property, but you don't have possession of the property because your possessory rights belong to the bond trustee under the primary lease. That primary lease, I would expect to have a term probably double what your financing term is. So let's assume 10 years. And the reason it's longer is because the trustee then has to go out and relet the property to someone else to try and get investors paid back. And the assumption is that they can't do that for the same amount of rent that you would pay because someone else is not going to want it as a library, right? But at the end of those 10 years, or if investors are paid back sooner, the leases go away, you get the property back. So you never lose ownership of the property, even if you decide to walk away. You may lose possession of the property until such time as the investors are paid or that primary lease terminates. But you will get it back. Okay. That work? Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Additional questions?
Madam Chair?
Go ahead, Josh.
That introduced another question in my mind, and it might be more for Emma, but I would imagine that the structure of these payments, that since it's a one-time payment every year, we want to make it the last possible second, last business day prior to the due date, or extended deadlines as may be, to continue to draw the earnings on the funds that are accumulated in for that payment, correct?
I can answer that. If I remember our conversation correctly, there will be two payments, one in the spring when we get our initial payment from the county for the disbursement of funds, and then another at the end of summer. So end of July, August is usually somewhere in there when that second payment comes from the county for disbursement of funds. And that will be the bigger of the two payments for the year for us. So we'll have an initial payment in the February timeframe, and then the bigger portion of the bigger part of the annual lease payment in August of each year. And that'll also line up well with our budget planning and approval timeline as well.
Okay. And can that first payment be as little as $1?
It cannot. It is. I mean, it isn't. I should say.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
he can.
The payments match up with the interest payments and the principal payments on the certificates. So the February payments, the interest payment. So like this is typical of a municipal financial product, is it has a, the principal matures annually, but they're semi-annual interest payments. So
So
you'll
the
have,
juice is always running.
yeah, so you'll have
Sure.
like, you'll have an interest payment in February. But so let's say, your property tax collection cycle, you're at the end of January, first part of February, you're getting roughly 56%, 58% of that 1.4 million plant levy, because that's just kind of typically the amount that comes in. But then, out of that, we'll make the interest payment, which is relatively small. And then that money will be invested until August. And then added to that money will be the second half tax collection, which comes in at the end of July, first part of August. And so that money isn't going to be sitting around very long to be invested until it needs to be used to pay the bigger payment, the principal and interest payment in August. But we're always trying to match that up, the tax collection cycle with the payment cycle. Yep.
Okay, Eric, I thought I was with you, but now.
Okay, no, that's great.
So I thought I understood that the distribution from the county on the property taxes collected would correspond with the amount of the February-ish payment, but did I just hear that February would be kind of interest only, or? Okay.
Yeah, typically we make it interest only. I mean, and we can, I mean, it's very rarely would we do it, make it a semi-annual principal and interest payment.
Okay.
And typically, you make your principal payment at the end of the revenue cycle,
Mhm.
right? So I want to be able to say, okay, I got 1.4 million. It's going to take a year to come in. I know when those monies are going to come in. So I certify that levy in September. I get, taxpayers pay it by December. County holds on to it for a month and a half. They pay me. I get, the library district is going to get the money, first big chunk, end of January, early February.
Okay.
Second chunk, end of July, early August. So we want to make sure that full amount comes in when we make the bigger payment in August. And so we just make the interest payment from the first half collections.
Understood. So we collect 700-ish thousand in January. Is there, and we drop that in the bank, and currently earning 5.4% at LGIP, give or take. Is there any problem with that 3% difference?
I don't want to wait. I don't want to wait into because these are tax exempt bonds. There's a lot of tax rules around it. But generally, unless you're allowed to have a debt service fund, and that debt service fund's allowed to earn interest, and as long as it's cleared out, in a reasonable, every year basically, then you can keep the interest earnings. If you don't, and you have some, and there's this notion of arbitrage where you're borrowing at tax exempt rates and you're earning more. So you're borrowing at 3.5%, you're earning 5%. That's the difference is arbitrage. Under certain circumstances, you would have to pay the difference back to the IRS the difference between 3.5 and 5, but not in a debt in that instance where it's in the debt service and it's just invested for 6 months. I'm not the tax attorney, but I've been around it long enough that
So just to because we're going down the rabbit hole. So when we talk about arbitrage, what we're worried about is the bond proceeds, investment of the bond proceeds. So just to be perfectly, the bond proceeds are going to come in on day one, and then they're going to go out on day one. Okay, there's not going to be any investment of the bond proceeds here because all the bond proceeds are going to buy the property on the day of closing. So a lot of times we do these projects, they're construction projects, right? So the money comes in and it sits in a construction fund, and it may take a couple years to build that building. And during that time, that money is earning money, right? We don't have that here. We're not worried about you earning money on your plant levy funds, and your plant levy funds aren't going to be with the bond trustee until you make your certificate payment, which is probably 15 days before it's due. So they'll be in whatever account they're in when they come in, and they'll be there until 15 days before your payment is due semi-annually, and they'll get paid out, and whatever you make on them in the interim is what you make on them.
Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that, and it's clear to me now what the differences are. I just don't want us to get in any trouble with anyone. Thank you. Other questions, comments? Okay, so the action item before us today, if I am going to state it correctly, is to authorize the team to prepare the financing and disclosure documents and to move forward with the rating agency review.
We don't have an action item on this, do we?
I thought it was listed as action. No. Nope. All right. Never mind.
Yeah,
I stand
this
corrected.
was just an informational
Thank you.
piece for now, and we'll have action items in the coming months, in the May, June, when we do the review revise of the financing and disclosure documents. And then the big one will be in July. So those will be the action items that the board will need to act on.
Thank you, Nick.
Yeah.
I misread my agenda. Go ahead, Eric.
Well, and Adam will probably correct me again, but yeah, the next probably the next time we we'll be here is in July, and that'll just be that resolution. All those other things we're going to get underway. But if there's a sense you didn't want to do this, you should tell us now, because in July we'll have it done a lot.
Don't make a
That Pinnacle branch is coming along really quickly. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. That brings us to item number 6, the director's monthly report.
Okay. Give me a half second to try and navigate screens because I have screen control, which is always dangerous. So give me half a second here and we'll be back up. Adam, Eric, thank you again. Okay. All right. We are back up and on to the director update. So I'm going to try and go through this quick so that we're not here till 10 o'clock tonight. So just going through in your board packet on my report shows I always start off with the HR stuff just because it's been a big piece of what we've been doing over the last year and a half. And that team of 3 is constantly working on making sure that we have our positions filled and that we're ready to go. So happy to be bringing on 3 new people last month. And I met one of our, let's see if I got it right. He is a unbound part-time library assistant. All right, I got it right. That started today. He was going through orientation. So we're happy to be bringing on the full complement of our team and going through that. The foundation is plugging it along. They have some new projects that they have going. One is the Figaro adoption kit. It's been popular, even crossing state lines in terms of gaining interest, and they are doing a lot to raise money for the Pinnacle branch and for other capital projects that the district has. A few operations updates. we did get some repayment from iCrimp when the lobby heater outside the store broke last fall, winter. And then we did send a letter to the Silverstone leasing company, Sundance, that we will vacate by September 30th from the Silverstone branch. That gives us essentially a month to move out of that building, assuming we can get the keys to Pinnacle by the end of August. We don't have exact timelines on all of that, but we did have to submit that this month in order to stay compliant with the lease terms, saying that we plan to vacate in that time period. Jason has been working with our vendor to get E-rate funding. Category 2 is for new equipment, category 1 being service. And we're happy that's going through because it significantly lowers our networking equipment costs. Material services really ramping up to get ready for Pinnacle. They've been doing a lot of projects in weeding and building carts to make purchases and doing a lot of fun things there. And then strategic initiatives, our newest of the departments, did an AI event and is doing a lot of centennial planning. So you'll hear a lot more about centennial next month. The centennial planning is this year, 2024, and we are celebrating the first public library services that started in 1924 by the Occidental Club. And I have it written down, but I'm going to try and do it from memory. The first official library service was September 12th, 1924. I very well could have that wrong. We'll have a much better presentation next month from staff to kind of go over all the things centennial related. Collection maintenance, looking at how many items are added and weeded, means that they've been removed from the collection, and then the patron initiated requests. So every month we do add 100+ items that members of our community have requested be added to our collection. Lots of people using computers and the wireless networks, right around average for most of those. Appreciate the staff adding the average number. It gives us a little bit of context to know what we're looking at for the monthly usage. Branch updates. When I was reading through all of the things, it's always fun to see the different events that they have going on. Be that some of these are a little outdated, so I might have the wrong one on here, but looking at some of the events that they had Cherry Lane had an after hours non-Valentine's Day event that was really popular. They have a lot of the story times at all the locations, but the ones at Orchard Park are really starting to find their audience, which is great as we approach the 1-year anniversary of opening Orchard Park. Unbound has brought in an AI presenter to go over AI and how it can be used in a business setting to improve workflow and social media content creation. And they also did a program to I get the name wrong because I don't have it in front of me, but a new business boot camp. And that boot camp was in partnership with the SBDC, the Small Business Development Center, and the SBA, the Small Business Administration. And they also utilized a grant that we'd received from US Bank to allow participants of that program to apply to receive one of the LLC funding grants, essentially, that would allow them to file their LLC in participating in that event. And Silverstone they run out of room every time they do those big programs, but they've been doing a great job with a lot of their children programs over there, and doing some outreach to the senior facilities that are near them as well. Circulation stats, relatively even, a little less on check-ins, but that's over the course of a year, you know, fluctuates between how many go out the month before and how many come back the next month. So I know I have a few overdue. Door count, doing great, keeping things up. The outreach interactions, we continue to really do a great job of getting out into the community and connecting with all facets of our community in new and interesting ways. And that's one of the numbers that I like to see climbing every month, and our teams across the district have done a great job of doing that. And then 3D printing is one of those mercurial ones as well. Especially as we come out of the holiday season, those numbers typically dip for a little bit before kind of rebounding as we go back into the summer. Programs up across the board, and our teams are very excited to be prepping for summer, even though it is a complicated and daunting task to get all of the programs planned for that. But as we're in the swing of the programs for the current program season, they are already looking ahead to summer and beyond. And we look forward to continuing to keep these numbers up as we go throughout the year. Let's see, I'm gonna skip past room reservations and go to volunteer stats. So I'm gonna try and pull this up over on my other screen so I can see exactly where some of these numbers are. But I wanted to be able to talk about our volunteer program a little bit as we go. So let me pull this up because the full spreadsheet didn't show up very well on screen. So we just used a simple graphic for the slide deck, but I have a lot of numbers that I wanted to try and go over with you. So see if I can get this. In January, we had 25 volunteers, and in February we had 24, and so far in March we have we make sure I don't have the wrong numbers. Actually, scratch that. Read that wrong. We have 24 in January, 23 in February, and 12 so far this year in March. And all total in those 3 months, we are looking at almost 300 hours of volunteer services to the various locations. So we have had a lot of community help, and one of the things I'm most excited about is as we are ramping up to get ready for summer, we're going to be re-engaging something that we used to do in the past, but had gone away from a little bit leading up to 2020, but definitely after 2020, where we didn't have the volunteers, especially teen volunteers, to help with the summer reading program. And we are going to be bringing that back this year. So our volunteer numbers at the end of the year are going to look significantly different this year than they have for the past several years, as we look to re-engage our community and providing that opportunity for them to help us kind of maximize how we interact with the public. The services that our volunteers do, things like pulling holds, helping make sure that the hold shelf is clean, helping prep program supplies and program preparation for programs, doing special initiatives that we have throughout the year, accompanying people to visits at senior facilities. Those are a few of the things that our volunteers are doing, and we're continually looking at how we can create new opportunities that are sustainable on our end, and that don't duplicate the services of library staff, but enhance what we are capable of doing to serve our community. So just wanted to throw that one in for the quarterly stats. Let me see if I can get back over here. And on the screen is a picture from staff day, 2 pictures from staff today, but the big one is all of our staff and almost all of our staff. We had a couple that were unable to attend, but we are much larger than we were when I started 12 years ago. This was from staff day in February, and it's always great to be able to take that photo. So I think that is all that I had to kind of go over, but happy to answer questions that I didn't cover.
Thank you, Nick. Questions, comments? Go ahead,
Yes.
Josh.
Nick, are the volunteers all like, I don't know how to say it. Is the Meridian Library District a coordinated volunteer opportunity for court mandated community service for folks that are in that situation? Or are all the 24 and 20 a month, whatever, are they just really out of the grassroots?
So let me think of how to answer this correctly. Yes and no. Yes, we can do that. No, that is not where our bread and butter is. Because what we have found is our teams, our staff, really work much better when there's a sustained time commitment, because there's typically a lot of training that has to go in. And by the time you get someone who has a 12 or 30 hour court mandated, it's not enough time to train them and then have them execute, because they're typically needing to get it done in a short period of time versus our sustained people are here for an hour to 6 hours a week, and there's not a lot for us to provide our work-wise for a volunteer to come in and knock out 4 to 8 hours a day for a month. So yes, we can. No, we don't really do that, but we have tried doing not only the court mandated, but the school project ones. That's the ones that really get us. Is where one of the classes will have a requirement of 4 hours or 10 hours from a class, or a service project from a group like Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, something like that. Those are really difficult because usually they need it quick, they need it yesterday, and they need something to work on. And if we don't have a project ready to go, it can be really difficult to accommodate those needs.
That all makes sense, and thank you for clarifying all that. One other question I had is there any tracking of like, here's the folks that started their library experience as volunteers and it led to a career in the industry?
That is a very great question. I don't know. We don't track that in any meaningful way. Anecdotally, that's how I started. So I know that it is a thing. And that's one of the reasons, like for me, really pushing for us to have those teen volunteers be engaged in a meaningful way is important for us to create more opportunities for us to connect with the public directly through their services, the teen volunteer services, but also for us to connect with those teen volunteers to create lifelong bonds of utilizing the library in a non-storytime manner, creating a lifelong appreciation for what libraries provide to the community, even if they don't, ever work in the library. But it's also a great opportunity for us to engage with those youth and invite them to apply for the page positions or junior librarian, or sometimes even the library assistant positions to get their foot in the door. And a lot of times those individuals that get started there do end up becoming lifelong librarians, even when some of us didn't intend to do that. So, but no, I don't have any stats on it.
Thank you, Nick. I am also very excited about the volunteer information and excited to see the teen volunteers for summer reading coming back. I mean, I just anecdotally, that's one of the most common things I get out in the community is interest in volunteering with the library and the very positive experience that teens have had in doing that program. You know, different folks having different experiences, but for some teens that are maybe not as socially comfortable, it was a way for them to take a step forward from where they were and be in a space that they already felt comfortable in and just kind of going to that next step. And so I'm very excited for that opportunity. And I think, bringing teens along on visits to senior facilities is just a magnificent synergy and a wonderful idea for all concerned. So I'm really excited about that.
And just as a note, a vast majority of our volunteers, span the age gamut. But right now, we do have a lot of retirees that come in and help with the pulling of holds and making sure the hold shelf's ready to go, and helping with some of the day-to-day tasks of the frontline employees. And so that is where a bulk of our service hours from volunteers is coming currently.
Other questions for Nick? All right, hearing none, then we will move on to item 7 on our agenda, which is a series of action items. We will take them individually. We have some job descriptions in our packets. These were provided to us in both a red line and a clean version. We will begin with the collection development library job description update. Anything to add, Nick?
So with all 4 of these, there were more changes than were deemed to allow it to stay in the consent. However, most of them across all 4 are largely just cleanup pieces so that they match the other job descriptions that you've been seeing over the last few months, so that we're using similar language, similar sentence structure, the same terminology and definitions. And so for the most part, that's really all you're going to see across all of these. Some of them had reference to job descriptions that they report to or report underneath them that no longer exist or have been retitled, and just a little bit of cleanup for some of the actual duties that have shifted or slightly been altered due to the new organizational design that we rolled out in October. So really all 4 of them are a cleanup, and they're nothing of substantial change.
Nick, if I may, I just have a general question on collection development librarian and digital service librarian and kind of the interaction. So if I understand correctly, the digital service librarian is working on electronic content as well as website and things of that nature. Is that correct?
Correct. So the digital services librarian does a lot with our databases, with our website, with our internal internal website, essentially, and they also do a lot with the other members on their team, which is the strategic initiatives team, especially the marketing librarian, in terms of making sure that there's consistency in digital signage and social media content being the same as what's on the website and things of that nature. And then also there's a lot of work in the past and a little bit less going forward, but with the History Center collection and the digitization of the materials in the History Center collection, and then making sure that those items are properly presented and displayed on the library's website. And then the collection development librarians are tasked with selecting and purchasing items for the collection. So they order, when you see the 1,289 items added and 1,000 plus items that were weeded, they're the ones who generate those lists, and then they work with the teams at the branches to get those items off the shelves, and then they work with other members of their team to once the items are ordered, the resource specialists and resource coordinators are tasked with getting those items shelf ready and over to the branches and out onto the shelves. So collection development librarians are the ones that are in the catalogs, the ordering catalogs to get us the items. I guess we don't really have catalogs anymore. Back when I did it a long time ago, we actually had paper catalogs that we would be selecting items out of. Theirs are not that way as much anymore. But does that kind of answer?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
Other questions? All right, then we will move through these. I would entertain a motion on the collection development librarian job description.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead, Laura.
I move to approve the collection development librarian job description.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Josh. Further comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to 7B. I would entertain a motion on the digital service librarian job description.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead, Laura.
I move that we approve the digital services librarian job description.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Josh. Further comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to 7C, the HR manager job description. I entertain a motion.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead, Destiny.
I move to approve the Human Resources Manager job description.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Josh. Further comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. 7D, executive assistant job description. A motion?
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Josh.
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the executive assistant job description as published.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Destiny. All those in further comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And item 7E, the library courier job description. A motion?
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Josh.
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the library courier job description as published.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Destiny. Further comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to item 8. This is the volunteer policy. This was provided in our packet again in clean and red line version. Nick, additional comments?
This is largely a cleanup also, but it does have significant changes to get to that cleanup. And the purpose of the volunteer policy is to provide information to our community on people who are interested in volunteering and laying out what to expect and from us and what we expect of them as they make the decision to volunteer or not. And it explains what volunteering means versus being an employee. So pretty standard stuff, but significant red lines just because of document cleanup stuff. So.
Thank you. And of course, the trustees are aware we periodically review all of our policies on a roughly annual schedule. Each of them come before us. So this is a standard type item for us to review and update policies as appropriate. Questions from the trustees? Go ahead, Laura.
Madam Chair, Nick, I noticed that it talks about on line 38 and 39 at background check. I assume the person who wants to volunteer pays for that background check, or who pays for the background check if we do a background check?
That the library pays for that. That is not something that is required for all volunteer positions, but for certain volunteer positions, it is necessary for us to do that.
Can you elaborate a little bit more?
It
on that?
depends if they're going like to a school or if they're going to be working directly with the public. They may be subject to that background requirement. Sometimes it is something that our HR team has indicated has to happen for that specific position. And sometimes it is something that can come about as a result of a partner that we're working with that would have that requirement as well.
Additional
Chair.
questions? Go ahead, Josh.
Nick, I had a question about in the volunteer roles and tasks. It specifically mentions driving library-owned vehicles, and I would think that does our insurance cover that, or is there could we potentially remove that job responsibility and just have a simple policy of, hey, volunteers aren't allowed to operate MLD vehicles because of the liabilities that could introduce. It just jumped out at me as like something that potentially could be very bad. If a volunteer is going out and they have a car accident, now because they're not an employee and maybe not following their insurance and stuff.
I'm not positive on the insurance piece. This wasn't something that was added in this year. This was something that we've had in the policy for a while. But I would have no problem with that being stricken from here.
Yeah, especially with the, we don't want a 16-year-old library volunteer driving.
We do have restrictions on like how employees can drive. Even you do have to get background checked. You do have to have your driver's license run through the database. Those are requirements that we do have. Right. So they would be subject to the same requirements if it were to stay in as staff that drive. Even if staff are driving their own vehicles during work time, they are subject to that as well. And so,
so I don't know how many officer volunteers have actually driven vehicles in the past.
I don't
imagine
know either.
But
in my knowledge, I have not seen or heard of that happening. So I don't think this would be detrimental in any way for us to make an amendment to have that stricken.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Laura.
I read it just the opposite. We're on section under volunteer rules, section A, tasks, lines 129 to 133. The sentence is volunteers may not perform essential duties or functions. And then the next sentence is these may include. And I think maybe some wording that these restricted essential duties may include would provide a little bit more clarity. Possibly, but I read it
For what
just-
it's worth,
just
I
the
apologize
opposite.
for wasting everyone's
So,
time there.
no, it's okay.
Read the whole sentence.
I didn't get it either.
No, I think, Josh, that brings up a good point. I think that we could improve the clarity there, right, within that sentence. If it wasn't clear to you, it's not going to be clear to other people as well. So, so if we change the wording to say at the risk of being repetitive, but in that second sentence saying the restricted duties that volunteers may not perform are something to that effect. So would staff prefer to try to amend it here or bring it back in an amended form?
I would say we could easily make the amendment here. And I would say that the easiest way is going to be more of a formatting thing than even a rewording, just by simply taking the sentence structure and moving it to kind of realign the sentence that ends on 129 and finishes on 130, rewording that, and then making everything that follows in this may include as bullet points following. It would be a much clearer way of being able to elaborate what those things are and call attention to the fact that these are not to be done. So I think that would be the easy way to do this without having to spend a lot of time thinking about the exact right wording.
Thank you.
So a bulletized list.
Here's what not to do. Before we get to a possible motion containing that direction, any other comments or questions on the volunteer policy? Okay, so the motion before us then would be to approve the volunteer policy as presented with a correction to the formatting of lines 128 to 133 to make it clear that these are duties the volunteers would not be performing. Is that adequate for the board? That's our motion then.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead, Laura.
I move that we approve the Meridian Library District policy, volunteer policy with the revisions to lines. Sorry, I just lost it. 128 to 133 to ensure the clarity of what volunteers may not do.
Thank you, Laura.
Second.
Thank you, Destiny. Further comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to item number 9, board committees. So it's been an exciting legislative session for libraries. And we've had a couple of bills not go through, and there's currently a bill that's active. This is House Bill 710. And I would imagine the library or trustees are at least somewhat familiar with this bill. It has passed the House. There was a hearing in the Senate State Affairs Committee where they took public testimony, and then I don't know if the official action is postponed or tabled action or carried it over to a future committee date to be determined by the chair, at which they would not take any additional public testimony, but they would have discussion amongst the committee members and then take action. I think any number of things could happen. The chair may not call it back. They may pass it with a do pass recommendation. They may pass it with no recommendation. They may hold it in committee. Any number of things could happen. However, I am concerned, as the trustees are aware, on the broad implications of such a bill for the library, both in terms of operation and legal and financial risk. This bill has an implementation date of July 1st, 2024, which is just around the corner. So what I would propose is the formation of 2 subcommittees with no more than 2 board members each, and also with staff, with Nick or individuals designated to work with Nick on those committees, to consider the operational or implementation aspects of this bill. Could be interpreted that individuals under 18 could not be in the library without a parent, right? That they might risk encountering material that's not appropriate for them. So what does that mean for our day-to-day operations? What does that mean for home delivery? What does that mean for outreach activities? What does that mean for the 24-hour holds vestibule that we have at Orchard Park and Pinnacle? It's going to have Pinnacle will have 24-hour hold vestibule as well. Just what we were talking about tonight. What does this mean for our teen volunteers? Just incredibly broad implications. Incredibly broad implications for how our library may operate should this bill become law. And then we need to think about, as a board, how do we respond to it? Do we take a very aggressive stance? Do we take a very protective stance and not put the library at any risk financially or legally whatsoever? Are we willing to step out as we have in the past, and take that risk on? I don't know the answers, and I think that there is a lot to consider and discuss in a relatively short amount of time. So the idea here is that these subcommittees could have some of these discussions, think through all the possible ways that we might be affected, and then bring some thought out ideas back to the full board for discussion as we get ready for the possibility of implementing this bill. It has not passed yet. It may not pass the Senate. It may not be signed by the governor. We don't know. But the time frame is short, and I'm anxious about it. So I would like us to start thinking through those possibilities. So the action item before us today would be to form those 2 committees. And then if that action item is approved, then I'd seek volunteers from the board to serve on them. again, 2 committees, no more than 2 board members each, and to have those kinds of discussions. And then, of course, a representative from each committee would communicate with the other, to make sure that a lot of the issues overlap so that we're covering all the bases there of what might happen. Comments, questions on this idea, concept?
Madam Chair, could you restate that last part so that it is clear there will never be a quorum to discuss these items between the committees outside of a posted board meeting, just to over clarify it so that we're extremely clear about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we wouldn't have the committees meet together outside of a board meeting, right? That would basically be all of the board. So we would have those discussions in open meeting and board. But you might, for example, say from the implementation committee, we think the 24-hole vestibule is a problem from a legal perspective. We don't know how, perhaps you could mark library cards as 18 and older, and you sign some sort of touchpad at the vestibule, and then you can scan yourself into I'm thinking on the fly. I don't even know how that would work. Legal committee, can you consider that issue in your portfolio of issues to consider? Would that provide us adequate protection or something like that? They would just kind of share questions back and forth, but not have a joint discussion meeting, because of course we don't want to have a quorum of the board, but just say, hey, make sure you're covering this issue. Hey, make sure you're thinking about that issue, because there is a lot of overlap. That's what I'm envisioning. And again, the committees won't be making decisions. They'll be collecting the basket of things that we need to consider, pros and cons, upside, downside, what's happening in other states. We've seen a lot of legal pushback around the country that's been pretty successful against these kinds of laws with very similar wording to what we're seeing here. So, legal subcommittee might gather some of that information and see, how they feel about risk for the library, about how they feel about aggressive action, and bringing that forward for full discussion at the board. That's what I'm envisioning for this group. But there is a lot to think about, and I think we need to just start that process sooner rather than later.
Madam Chair. I agree. I think it's really important that we form committees where this meeting structure isn't necessarily conducive to, without making decisions. But for example, I imagine that the implementation review committee would really kind of need to have those conversations on the move in the library, looking at kind of the day-to-day, what the structure is in each of our different buildings, so that we can bring that information back to the full board for when it is time to make a decision. So I think this makes a lot of sense, and I think it's the responsible thing to do given our responsibility as trustees.
Thank you. Go ahead, Laura.
Madam Chair, I'm going to concur. I think that if a bill isn't passed this session, it will come back another session. It is an election year, so that may result in something that happens in our favor. But moving forward, I don't see these slowing down necessarily as quickly as we would like them to, these concerns. So it's worth just going through and looking at those two areas, implementation and legal, to so we have a complete understanding of what our options are and the ramifications of different possible options.
Thank you. Further comment?
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Destiny.
I move to establish 2 subcommittees made up of 2 trustees each. One for legal review and one for implementation review.
Thank you, Destiny.
Madam Chair, request, would the motioner be open to an amendment to that motion to include the library director as representative from staff to be on those committees as well,
That
without violating open?
that
meeting
does not require addition. That because the committees would be made up of 2 members of the board and then whoever they ask to have join them. So it wouldn't be required as part of the motion. So.
Got me. Second.
Thank you, Josh. Further comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So we have established a legal review subcommittee and a implementation review subcommittee to include no more than 2 trustees each for purposes of gathering information, but not decision-making. Volunteers?
Madam Chair, I'd like to be on the implementation review committee.
Thank you, Laura.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead, Jeff.
I'm happy to serve on either committee.
Thank you, Jeff. I would encourage you to participate in the legal committee if you are so inclined.
Yes, that's fine.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Cecily.
I would like to participate on the implementation review committee, please.
Thank you, Destiny.
Madam Chair, I'm willing to serve and fill the remaining legal review committee position.
Thank you, Josh.
And
I
I would
appreciate.
also like to thank Jeff for his testimony he's been providing, along with all the work that everyone else on the board has been doing in that regard.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that, everyone. I think Destiny and Josh in particular have provided really excellent feedback on policymaking and bottom line issues. So I think looking at operational issues, looking at financial risk issues, we're well covered there. And then we have Jeff and Laura as our experienced trustees. I obviously will serve on neither committee. All right. Then that brings us to item number 10, executive session. Executive sessions are held for specific purposes and are closed to members of the public. I will make a motion to go into executive session pursuant to Idaho Code Section 742061B. We will roll call in. Jeff?
Yes.
Josh?
Yes.
Destiny?
Yes.
Laura?
Yes.
And I'm Megan. Yes, we are in executive session. About that. Thank you. All right, so we ended our executive session at 9:18, and that brings us to item number 11, future agenda items. Nick mentioned that we will be talking about the centennial next month, and I'm very excited to hear about that. The junior librarian position, I know in the past we received kind of a presentation or a report from our junior librarians on their experience, and I'm not offhand quite sure when we got the last one, but I would hope that that would be part of the cycle. I know we were recently looking for someone.
We just to answer you real quick, we do not have any junior librarians right now. The reason we had some of that in the recent past was because we had a grant that allowed us to get more than what we would normally get, and for longer. And so we're just in a weird cycle of kind of getting back to normal-ish and kind of redefining. But so currently we do not have any, but we will be hopefully hiring some in the coming months. So I would not expect a report from them until late summer.
Yeah, and that's perfectly fine. I just hope that that kind of stays on the radar as something to do. I think it's very interesting to hear that perspective. Other items? Well, of course, if you do have something, please let me know. And that with that, we will adjourn. It is 9:20. Thanks, everyone.